Okay, so today our topic is designing assignments to engage students in meaningful research. This semester we're trying to run with a theme of assignments, and later in the semester we're hoping to have a student-faculty roundtable that is focused on assignments where students can actually talk about what their experiences have been with assignments at FIT, give faculty some insight into how they experience multiple assignments from different classes all at once, how they experience the instructions that we offer them, the expectations that we provide, and likewise faculty can talk to students about what our goals are and what our aims are when we design assignments. So this is just another opportunity to create conversation around meaningful learning, and so we're going to start that today with this presentation. And so I am pleased to introduce Meg Joseph from Global Fashion Management, Miyo Sandlin from the library, and Sarah Blazer from the Writing and Speaking Studio, who are going to lead us in this presentation and workshop. So without further ado, please come on up.
Okay. Hi, I'm Meg Joseph. I teach in Global Fashion Management. I'm really happy to be here today. Want to once again introduce Sarah and Miyo. We've been working hard to put together this presentation on designing assignments to engage students in meaningful research. To begin, want to talk about what is information literacy. So information literacy, which is a through line for what we're going to be talking about today, is about recognizing when information is needed, having the ability to locate, evaluate, and use the information, and doing it effectively and ethically. And so we provide you with this definition at the start of this presentation because we have the sense in our experience working with students that they don't know what information literacy is. And so part of what we're trying to do here today is not just share what we do, but to model for you what you can do with your own students. We feel like that's, we want to be really explicit about that because we feel like that really helps. And so part of what we're going to be doing today is each of us are touching on different aspects of working with information literacy. So my section is called Research Crap and Legitimate Internet Information. And, you know, when I talk to my students about research crap, they all love that. I'm like, let's make sure the research is crappy but not crappy. And they're like, ooh, what does that mean? It's like sorry, not sorry. CRAP, C-R-A-A-P, is actually a highly used method for evaluating resources. Is anyone familiar with CRAP? Oh, okay, good. So I'm so glad to know that some people are, but I'm also glad that I'm going to share something new for you. So, I don't know, this reminds me of many of my students, right? You give your students a research assignment, and they're like, oh, great, I'm going to go straight to Google. Show of hands, anyone have this issue with their students, right? And so I think that, you know, the key thing is when we assign a research project and students are heading straight to the internet for sources, they often are using that Homer Simpson method for evaluating the sources that they find, right? Oh, well, if I Googled it and it's there, then it must be a good resource, right? And then you don't find out about it until they submit the project, and then you're going, oh my gosh, these sources are terrible, right? This paper's not so good because they didn't use great sources. This was definitely a problem for me. So I decided to incorporate a brief lesson on evaluating sources into my class so that when I give them their first research project assignment, I actually take class time to talk to them about how to evaluate sources. And so what I do is I found this nice short OER video, and I'm going to share that with you right now.
No, that's not what we're talking about here. The CRAP method can be used to help you evaluate a source. In this case, CRAP stands for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. Currency refers to the timeliness of the information. To check the currency of a source, you can look at things like when was the information published or posted? Has the information been revised or updated? And are the links functional? Relevance refers to the relevance of the information for your topic. How well does this information relate to your topic? Have you looked at a variety of sources? If this is your first source, you may want to give yourself a few more options. And who is the intended audience? If this source was meant for kindergartners, you shouldn't present it to college students. Authority. This is about the source of the information. Who wrote, published, or sponsored the information you're looking at? What are that person or entity's qualifications to write about this topic? And did you find the information in a reputable publication? If it was on your grandma's Facebook page, skip it. Accuracy is all about the reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. Does the source use evidence from reputable sources to support its claims? Can you verify the information with another source? Because I said so is not good enough. And are there spelling or grammar errors? If so, it's a hard pass. Finally, we have the purpose, why this source was created. Is it meant to entertain, to persuade, to inform? Does the source appear impartial and objective, or is the language trying to evoke an emotional response in the reader? What biases can you identify? Congratulations! Now that you know how to check the currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose of a source, you're ready to get out there and find good information. Happy researching!
So essentially what I'll do is in class, I will share this video with the students. I'll show the video. And then after the video, and I'll ask them to make notes as they watch, and I'll ask them, what does CRAP stand for? And I'll put on the board, we'll make some notes here so that everyone is very clear about what they're supposed to be doing. I have put together for you, and I also, again, do this for my students, a handout, which essentially highlights, thank you so much. We can just, oh, thank you. Almost verbatim, I took it from the video so that they have all the questions there so that they can interrogate their sources. For those of you who like who would like a digital version, I have a QR code for you here. And so you can scan the QR code and pull it on your phone if you'd like. Now on the other side of the handout, which has all the questions, I actually have an exercise for you. And I do this exercise with my students. So I give them the 3 sources that are on the back of the handout. If you turn the handout over, you're going to see 3 sources. And if you want to access those sources digitally, you can use the QR code on the right. And I ask them to work in teams and to look up these 3 sources, which I actually pulled from a student's paper. Like, these sources were actually turned in. And I ask them to use the CRAP method to evaluate the sources. So I know some of you are finishing your lunch, but I'm going to ask you to please access these sources right now and to work with the people you're sitting with. And if you're sitting by yourself, you can just turn your chair and work with other people and just look at these 3 sources and spend a few minutes evaluating them according to the CRAP method. And then we'll talk about what you found. And you can tell us, we'll debrief around the room, you can tell us whether the sources are crappy with a capital C-R-A-A-P or with a lowercase c. All right, so let's take maybe, 10 minutes to do this. If we're done sooner, all the better. Tell us, how was it? You thought it was fun. Yay! Other people have a good time with this? Tell us. So it wasn't super easy, but it made you think. And you were able to come to a conclusion, and it was nice to be able to do it in a group? Good, good, good. Okay, so this is all great feedback, and you know what? I get the same feedback from my students, right? And 3 sources, I give them a little bit more time, but 3 sources seems to be the right amount. So what we do then is we come back together in a plenary session, and we look at each of the sources together. And so here's the first one. Now, using the CRAP method, is it a thumbs up crap or a thumbs down crap? What do you think? Is this a lot of thumbs down? We have 1 medium source. So what's wrong with this resource? Who wants to tell us what's wrong with it? Tell us.
I didn't understand the point of it at all, or why anyone would look at it, but we thought it seemed to be from a commercial source, and so it wasn't trustworthy for that reason.
Okay, so it's a commercial source, less trustworthy. Other thoughts about this? Unattainable, right? Who's going to pay $4,500 for a course paper? Right? Yeah. Tell us. Yeah, so it's irrelevant because it's 2022, and so we kind of already know about the trends. And so, and one other thing I'm going to point out to you, Research and Markets is a commercial report aggregator, and if you are going to use a commercial report, you really should go to the issuer of the report, not, you're essentially saying, I'm going to buy, Gucci at Walmart instead of going to the Gucci store. Like, that's the equivalent. And I tell students that so that they understand what a a report aggregator is versus going to the original source. And so whenever that happens, and I emphasize with the students, it's important to find the original source. That's going to help you to really evaluate whether it's a good source to use. Okay, the next one. This was in the second one. What did you think about this one? Thumbs up or thumbs down? We got some thumbs up, some thumbs down. Thumbs down, tell us why. In the back, tell us why. Shady references. Aha, so let's take a look there so we can all see what's being talked about. Aha, so here are references. How are we going to be able to find these references, right, to evaluate them? Okay, do we have any textile experts in the room? So I'm not a textile expert either, but I was very curious about this journal. I said, I've never heard of advanced research in textile engineering. Let me look up that journal. And I couldn't really find anything on the journal other than the articles that were published in the journal. And then I looked up the publisher of the journal. And let's see, is the publisher listed here? The publisher is not listed here, but when I looked up the journal, the publisher was a company called Austin Publishing, I think. And I'd never heard of that publisher. And so are you familiar with something called predatory journals? Right? So predatory journals are journals that essentially make scholars pay to have their work published. And it calls into question the validity and legitimacy of the journal. And there are actually search engines that scholars have built where you can put a publisher or a journal name into the search engine, and it will come back and tell you if that's a predatory publisher or journal. And it turns out that the publisher of this publication is on the list. Now, students don't know this, right? And so we need to be able to explain to them very simply, hey, great catch to check the references section and see, what's there. You can look up, are there other references to this journal? You can do a Google Scholar citation search, right? There's other ways to find out. I don't expect my students to know all of this up front, but this provides a great opportunity to talk about it. And then lastly, we had this one. What did you think? Did you get to this one? Thumbs up or thumbs down? The third one? Medium? How come medium?
One of the big things if you scroll down, still it's kind of outdated.
So not very current. Anything else on this? Again, I'm going to tell you, are you familiar with fiber to fashion? I wasn't either, right? And so when you find stuff on a website, it's really important to go to the About section to find out about the website. That'll help you determine if this is a legitimate source. And it turns out fiber to fashion is essentially an information aggregator, right? And so they provide this really nice link here, and that's where the research originally comes from. And it's an actual research report. And it almost made me question if they took this information with permission or not, right? So again, this underscores the importance with students, how important it is to go to the original source. The original source is actually a real report. It's a legitimate report. It's posted on the college website for UMass Dartmouth. And so it is a legitimate report, but let's go to the original source. And the report is actually laid out in a much more readable form than on an HTML page, right? Okay, was this helpful? I find it so helpful to walk a mile in my students' shoes, and I find this exercise just raises awareness and brings attention to something that I teach in the graduate program. It's not on my graduate students' radar screen a lot of the time. They are very appreciative of this. And so what I'll say to you is, let me go back to the slides now. Here are the key points to remember. It's important to show students how to use the CRAP method. We can't just give it to them and say, have a nice day, use this. We have to show them how to use it. We have to show them how to investigate the sources that they find on the internet. Otherwise, they're just going to use what's on the internet. And it's important to discuss when to use the internet and when the FIT library databases might be a better choice. And so I only gave you 3 references from this student team's paper, but they were all from the internet. And so this also sparked a great conversation about how important it is to start with the FIT library databases, particularly when you're doing industry research, and to work with a librarian if you're not sure where to start, because there are a lot of databases. So I hope this was helpful to you, and on that note, I'm going to turn the mic over to an FIT librarian who's going to talk to you about working with the databases. Thanks so much.
Hi everyone, I'm Miyo Sandlin from the library. So I'm going to be talking next about library sources, visual sources, and citing those sources. So Meg already went into really good detail with her exercise about the CRAP method. This is also perfectly relevant, applicable to library resources as well. So I'm going to be focusing more on relevance. Just because a student gets something at the library or finds something at the library, it doesn't automatically mean A, that it's in the right subject area, or B, that it's the right resource for that assignment. So I want to try and put you guys in the shoes of your students. We're going to do a little quiz. If you can take out your phone and go to menti.com, or your tablet or your iPad, go to menti.com and type in this quiz, 7374-6394. Let me make sure that's still the right number too, because sometimes they'll change it on me. Yeah, 7374-6394. So you should see this research question. This is a real topic that I saw in an assignment. The student was researching Peter Paul Rubens and how he made his income or his living. So which of these databases would you use? Hopefully it shows up a little bigger on your phone. We've got JSTOR, Artful Text, Art Index Retrospective, ArtNet, Oxford Art Online. So I'm going to...
Could you tell us the number again?
Yeah, 7374-6394. It's a little bigger there. All right, see some of you are already buzzing in. There's, you can do multiple answers if you want. We've got about 11 or 12 people here today. I'm on 8. Give you a few more seconds to buzz in. Which databases should you use for this research topic? All right, anyone need another minute? Raise your hand if you're still... Okay, I'm going to go to the next question. All right, second question. I wanted to do one that was non-art related, something maybe outside our wheelhouse. So next question, we've got another topic. And again, this is a real topic that I saw on a paper. Zoonotic diseases and deforestation is your topic. Which databases should you use? Gale One File Environmental Studies and Policy, Environment Complete, New England Journal of Medicine, Mintel, JSTOR. Again, you can choose multiple databases. All right, I see some responses coming in. All right, we're at 10. All right. All right, so now let's take a look at the answers. Anyone need another second before moving on? All right, so let's take a look at the correct answers. All right, so I would say a majority of you were on the right track. Anyone have any questions about these? Anyone want to dispute any of these? I see yes. Oh, okay. Well, this is a good opportunity to introduce you to JSTOR. JSTOR is probably one of the more well-known and bigger collections of humanities journals. So there's a lot of art history stuff in there. There's also a lot of social science and some economics, which is why it worked really well for this topic. And I will say this is based on my personal experience of like searching this topic in these databases. Some other things to note, the wrong answers, I feel like maybe it's more important to go over those. Artful text is actually one that I would normally use for this, and I did try it, and I was surprised that I didn't find the right answer, which is just to show that sometimes trial and error will show you which is the right ones, and sometimes your past experience is not helpful in these cases, which is something, you know, again, the nonlinear process of research is something that's hard for students to understand sometimes. Art index retrospective, anyone know why this would not be a good choice? Anyone familiar with this source? I don't use it a lot, and that's because it's not full text. It's just an index. So a lot of cases it's not helpful to undergrads in particular who maybe are not looking for stuff that's outside of FIT. And then ArtNet, anyone familiar with this? Someone's nodding? Why would we not use this for this assignment? Or why might this be inappropriate for undergrads? Yeah. No, so it's actually an art market resource. It tells you data on sales for artwork, but the real reason we don't want to use it is because it's so expensive. It's only available to the Art Market Studies program, so most of our students don't actually have access to it. It's listed on our list of databases, but we can't give it to most of our students. So that's why you wouldn't use it, for a technical reason. All right, let's take a look at the next slide. All right, any surprises there? Were you surprised by any of these? So I'd say, again, a lot of you did a great job identifying that this would be a good resource, Scale One File Environmental. Not so many of you picked JSTOR. So those of you who might be familiar with JSTOR as a humanities database might be surprised to know that there's actually a lot of biology, environmental studies, hard science journals in there. So yeah, feel free to use it for those topics as well. Anyone surprised by New England Journal of Medicine? Yeah? Yeah, I was as well. I thought this would be a sure hit, but it turns out their focus is so narrowly on medicine, they don't focus on public health or necessarily environmental factors of health. It's just on medicine. And then nobody picked Mintel. Good job. Mintel is a marketing database. There's nothing there. All right, so you guys did pretty good, but I do see that some of you got tripped up. I'm guessing, this might be areas in where you don't have a subject specialty necessarily, Or there's just a few databases out there that you haven't heard of, which is, I think, true for everybody. So yeah, hopefully this helps recreate the experience of what your students are going through. A lot of times when they are approaching research, they're brand new to our collection, or maybe they're new to the subject area, and they don't have a lot to go on. You know, they look at the title, they're like, is the title related? Does it have art in it? Does it have environment in it? That's not great, right? But that's where a lot of them are starting. So we want to help students. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to go back to the presentation. Okay, so how can we help students overcome these barriers, get them to engage in meaningful ways with their research? So one suggestion I have, based on a lot of things I've seen, is to set specific descriptions in your assignment requirements. So don't just send students to the library and call it a day. They get overwhelmed and frustrated, and a lot of times they turn to their old friend, their comfort zone, Google, right? One recommendation I have is to be careful about the word scholarly. I think scholarly can be very vague. I see it on a lot of syllabi, a lot of assignments, and I don't have a problem with this word if professors take the time in class to talk about what that means and what they expect. But a lot of times students come and they're lost. They don't know what that means. They don't know what a scholarly resource is. It can be kind of a subjective term a lot of times. Sometimes I think people actually mean peer-reviewed resource, like they want a peer-reviewed journal, in which case, I recommend saying that because that is something that is measurable. You can tell if something is peer-reviewed or not based on if they have the peer review process. Scholarly, again, is a little bit subjective. One really good thing to do is to show an example of what you mean by a good resource. Recommend a specific database that you think is good for an assignment, or a journal that you think is relevant for your subject area, or a website that has good quality content. This gives them a safe place to start research, and it also shows them who the voices of authority are in a discipline. Authority is one of the things on the CRAP test, right? But for students who are new, they don't know what that means. They don't know who those people are. And again, if you're not sure, maybe you're not so familiar with our collection, you're new, or you work in between a lot of institutions, one recommendation I have is to use the subject dropdown from our library database list. So let me show you what that looks like. So this is our library databases page. The full list is 170 databases long. Again, overwhelming to students, right? They don't know where to start. But we have this subject dropdown here where you click it, and you can narrow down by a subject area. So if you were to pick sustainability and environment, for example, which would be a great area for that zoonotic diseases question, this narrows down the list to 7 databases. So now a student has 7 sources within to work with. That's much more manageable. You don't have to do a lot of legwork yourself to get them ready for that. You can just tell them to do that. So yeah, I really want to focus on we really want students to focus on engaging deeply with the resources, getting immersed in the subject matter, and not getting tripped up on academic jargon. All right, so let's talk about visual sources. Quality also matters for visual sources, but there's different parameters for what those are. And then we also have to get into ethics in a way that is a little bit different sometimes from textual sources. So again, trying to put you guys in your students' shoes. When they're doing an image search for artwork, a lot of times they'll do a Google search, and this is kind of what they get in the list of results. So which of these would you guys avoid? I don't know if you can see the data at the bottom. I think there's some obvious answers, though, up here. Feel free to raise your hand. Yeah. Yeah, like this notebook's pretty obviously not the original. This one, if anyone has noticed, is probably not the original portrait. I mean, this is very obvious, but sometimes it's not, right? Sometimes there are very good copies out there that are done as exercises or by artists living the same time period. But that's a good point. Anything else that stands out as obviously wrong? Yeah. Yes, Pinterest, I think, is on a lot of people's pet peeves because it allows you to upload images, but doesn't necessarily require you to put metadata up there, or sometimes the metadata is wrong. So yeah, Pinterest is another one to be really, really careful of. So yeah, other parameters to think about. Again, does the image represent the object you intended? This also gets tricky because, for example, in this one, Van Gogh painted a lot of self-portraits, right? Sometimes in the same year. So you want to make sure that the student has the right work, not a work from a different year or the same year but a different work, that they're not getting confused. Again, quality for digital images means high resolution, not pixelated, not cropped or distorted. Sometimes I've seen images of this that are flipped, or they've been stretched out to fit something like a notebook or, like you were saying, a blanket. And the textual information, how reliable is it? Is it trustworthy? Is it accurate? Sometimes you have a great image that has wrong information with it, the wrong title or the wrong year. So again, beware of sources such as Pinterest, DeviantArt, eBay, Etsy, anything with like a commercial purpose. Museums, libraries, universities, these are better sources. And then Wikipedia and Flickr, those can be a mixed bag. You know, some cultural institutions have a Flickr account, and they have great images up there. And then sometimes you just have a tourist who took a picture of a artwork and then uploaded it. And so, yeah, you have to be careful. So one tip I have is to steer your students towards the ArtStore library database. Has anyone heard of this or used this before? Okay, but maybe not everybody. So ArtStore is an image database that basically compiles images across different museum collections and makes them available to students. So you know that these are good quality because these come from the source themselves. So the metadata is going to be correct because it's provided by the institution, and it's going to be a high-res, high-quality image because it's probably the original. It hasn't been uploaded and downloaded thousands of times. So yeah, that's one tip I have, is to check out ArtStore. And then switching to ethical concerns for a second, ArtStore also has you covered there because they state very clearly in their content agreement, it's totally fine to use all their images for scholarly purposes in the classroom or student assignments. So you're covered there. Another great source is to look for anything that has a Creative Commons license or is in the public domain. Anyone not familiar with Creative Commons? I think it's not as new a concept now, but maybe some of you haven't seen this symbol. Basically, this is just a symbol denoting the Creative Commons license. And there are like several different levels. I don't want to get too into it. But basically, this means that if you see this on or near a work that it's about, you're allowed to remix this, reuse it, adapt it, use it for your work, incorporate it in your work. The artist is allowing you to do so, and this is how they're telling you that it's okay to do that. This is the public domain symbol. So if you see this on a work, it means that the copyright has expired. So now you can use this without restrictions. Feel free to remix and reuse. And so basically, these are just tools to let your students be aware of so that they know that it is okay to reuse this stuff, and then the artist is okay with it, you know, not just from a legal standpoint, but from an ethical standpoint. All right, so some tips to wrap up this section on visual sources. Again, I recommend using ArtStore for images. And require citations for your images. This is the best way to get a conversation going about whether or not your students should be using that image, or if maybe there's a better image out there. You can't have that conversation if you don't know where those images are coming from. And set a good example by citing the images that you put on your slides. I know that sometimes I'm not so good about this, we're in a hurry, we made the slides the day before, but try to get in the practice of doing this because it is a good example for your students. And also they should see that these images, this art, it didn't come out of nowhere, it's not out of thin air, you got it from somewhere, and you should tell them what your sources are so they can use them. Another recommendation I have is to pick a specific citation style on your assignment or your syllabus. I feel like sometimes faculty want to be flexible and sort of open, and they're like, yeah, just do what you're comfortable with. But sometimes I see this leading to confusion for students. Because what happens is they'll start bibliography in APA, and then they'll do it halfway through in MLA, and then by the end you're like, I don't know what style this is anymore. It's a bibliography, it's there. So sometimes I feel like it leads to confusion, and it's better for the student to stick to one, get to know one really well. If you need suggestions, I would say APA is the most popular on campus. It's used by the FBM department, so there's a lot of support about that. MLA seems to be the one that students are most comfortable with coming out of high school, so that's another good one. And then Chicago is the one used by the History of Art program. So things to think about when you're picking a citation style. And lastly, keep in mind that educational use for images is very different from commercial use. So I think it's important to get students thinking about that now, because for educational use, we have this big umbrella, right? A lot of things are okay. A lot of things are considered fair use. Who's gonna come after a student on like an art project, right? But when they graduate, when they start making art for companies or go in business for themselves, it's a very different story. They could get into trouble if they're not aware of if they're using something in the right way or something that they're allowed to use. We don't want them getting in trouble down the road. We owe it to them to make them aware of these issues now. And we also want them to protect their own work, right? We want them to know that sometimes it's not okay if someone is using your work in a way that you don't want or that you didn't give permission. So we want them to protect their own work and protect their livelihood. Keep forgetting to use this clicker. Okay, so do we have time? Yeah, we have time for one more exercise on citation. I know that sometimes this is difficult for professors because it is also difficult for me. I teach citation all the time, and I forget all the time because it is, kind of finicky, and they do change it from time to time. So let's do a citation together of an image on the internet. This is a very common one and a very tricky one. So I've got the format down here for how it should look. You've got author, date of publication, title of photograph, and then you've got digital image in brackets, title of the website, and then URL. All right, this is gonna be hard, but I did that on purpose. I figured you guys would be more advanced. Where is the author of this work, this photo? Oh, very good. I wanted you guys to say Scott Newman. That would be wrong. Scott Newman's the author of the article, right? This is a very common mistake I see. And it's easy because look how tiny the photo credit is, right? Like, what student's gonna know that right away? Your eye is gonna jump to the byline. So yeah, this is the author of the photo. And you probably can't see, but it'll say Suez Canal Authority, which is another concept that sometimes students are unfamiliar with, that you could have a corporate or group author for a photo. What about date of publication? Can anyone spot that from far away? The photo. I should have given you a QR code so you could pull this up on your phone. Sorry.
I mean, if you don't have anything except the date the article was published, how would you research?
Yeah, that is what I decided to go with. In the example I have, I was like, let's do the date of publication. Technically with APA, you can say ND, no date, but again, I think, this is open to interpretation. If you have the date of the article at least, then you're providing some information to the person reading the paper or reading your research. So in that instance, I think it's more helpful. But yeah, it's kind of open for debate or interpretation. What about the title of the photograph? Any disputes on that? Yeah, you guys are making this too easy. So yeah, there's a caption on the photograph. Heavy equipment is used to try to dig out the keel of the Ever Given, a massive cargo ship wedged across the Suez Canal. That's what I recommend using as the title of the photograph. Yes?
So, should Scott Newman have indicated the date of the photograph, or could we guess that Scott Newman also could not find the date of the photograph?
I don't know, because that's looking at journalistic or publishing standards versus a scholarly publishing standard. So I think maybe there's different rules, different strokes for different professions. Obviously, from a student's vantage, that would be nice. And I think if you wanted to take the extra work, sometimes if something is posted in Getty Images, you can go to the Getty Images data bank of images and see if you can find it. I think that sometimes is a little excessive. Again, that's open to your interpretation and your standard. You can set that for the students because you're the one grading the assignments. That's what I always tell students. See what your professor says. Another option that is also okay according to APA is that you can make up a title for an image. So if there was no caption under here, you could say something like, big boat next to excavator or something. You would just put that in brackets to show that you came up with that title yourself. That's also considered acceptable by APA standards. All right, so let's look at the final citation. So again, there's the example. And then this is my interpretation of how to do that citation. Any arguments? Naysayers? Okay, but yeah, I just wanted to recreate the experience for your students. I think you guys actually did a very good job because, again, you're experts, but students are all over the place. They don't know where to start sometimes, they get frustrated, and it is kind of annoying because they're so specific about italics and brackets and periods that they get overwhelmed. One suggestion I have is that in-text examples are okay too. This at least gives you a time, a source. I think this is preferable for something like a presentation if you're going to put it on a slide or maybe in a mood board or something where you don't want a lot of text. So at least, again, you're starting the conversation about where's an appropriate place to go for images. What source did you use? And then it'd be nice to have a bibliography at the end. All right, so how can the library help? Get to know the library if you haven't. I know that, we were closed for a while. A lot of people didn't have the opportunity to come in, and even if you've been here for a while, things change. So, please come to visit us periodically. Just wander around. We're on the 5th floor of Goodman. You can always request a library instruction session. That's the URL for the form. We can come into your class, or your class can come into the library, and we can tell them about how to use our resources, research tips, citation. If you don't have time for a 15-minute or 1-hour session, check out our YouTube channel. This is like a new thing during the pandemic, but we've kept it up. We have videos ranging from 30 seconds to like 15, 20 minutes, half an hour about all of our resources, research strategies, research tips, citation. Look at the research guide for your department. So we have a number of research guides that are subject specific, major specific. And again, if you're like, well, I want to recommend a good book or a database, I don't necessarily know what the library has in its collection, you can just put up the research guide for your department in your syllabus or in your Blackboard course shell, and then that step is taken care of. You've done your job. If there isn't one, request one. We don't have every single class, every single subject covered. We try to get most of them. But if you feel like it would be helpful to have a research guide for your class or your major or program, let us know. We'll make one. And lastly, update your syllabi. So I do see professors who do the work of like, oh, I got a great database, or I'm going to gear this whole assignment towards this journal. But then we stop subscribing to that database, and they don't realize it. And the student comes in, and they're like, I need to do this assignment. We have to use this database. It puts everybody in an awkward situation. So yeah, make sure that if you are doing that step of recommending something, you're making sure it's up to date. Make sure we still subscribe to it. Make sure that magazine's still being published. All right. I think that's it. Please write down any questions or thoughts that you have. We'll have a Q&A later. But next, it's Sarah's turn.
Okay, so we've been talking about locating sources, evaluating sources, and this last part is going to be more focused on what students do once they find those sources, the ones that they're going to use in their written or spoken work. So I want to talk about how and why students struggle with this part, and just a couple of ideas, assignments, and lessons that I think can help, that help me. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is just what do you need to know if you don't already, right, about how students struggle to integrate source material into their own work. So I'm coming from the perspective of the writing and speaking studio, where we see students from undergrad to grad, so all different areas, all different levels, all different experiences, but also from the perspective of a first-year writing teacher. So it really, I'm really talking about all FIT students. So here's some of the top things that we see. So number one, they struggle to read thoroughly and fully comprehend the sources. This is no surprise, I know. But this can be due to a lot of reasons, including their skill level, their past experiences, their experiences within a particular content area, right? So if they're taking a class that's not something that they've studied at any length versus, the third course in an area, right? Those are very different experiences that students are bringing to the research and writing process. So their ability to even decode, much less comprehend the text in those areas is gonna vary widely. So we need to be mindful of that. And certainly time constraints, right? Whether those are constraints that they are imposing on themselves or constraints that your curriculum imposes, or all the things that they have managing at any given time. I definitely think students have too much going on, but I also see a lot of students procrastinate, right? They actually could do more to take time and break the process up. So both things are true, and we try to help students with both of those things in the studio, but we can also do this in our classrooms. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, they struggle to connect information and ideas across source material. So they're reading one thing, they're kind of following along, okay, I get the point. They read another thing, same thing. But then when it comes to bringing it all together, they're really struggling to connect across the material. Okay, last thing I want to focus on is their struggle to clearly and meaningfully integrate source material into the written and spoken work. So this is when we're talking about, yes, the mechanics of citation, that's one part of it, but it's also how they are introducing and explaining, contextualizing source material so that people, the readers, understand why. Why is this source here? What are you saying about it? How does it connect, right? Rather than them just dropping it in and the reader or the listener having to guess, right? So these are the three main things that I see. And I want to talk a little bit about how we can address some of these things. Okay, so first of all, assign supportive assignments, right? With the first two areas, reading and comprehending sources and connecting information and ideas across source material, the assignment that I use most often with my students is the annotated bibliography assignment. This is the whole point of the annotated bibliography assignment is to slow them down, right? They're in the research phase. They're hopefully doing some of the things that we heard about with the first two presentations. We don't want them rushing into the writing process or to the drafting process until they've had time to look, evaluate, read, think, make notes, right? But if we don't create this sort of speed bump in the process, they aren't going to do it. We probably wouldn't either. So it's just something that's important that we can do to help them along the way. An annotated bibliography assignment is just really all about having students take good notes on their sources. Summarize the key points, identify significant points of evidence, evaluate the credibility of the source, think about how it relates to other sources in the set of material that they're looking at. That's the kind of work that we want to have them doing, again, before they start drafting the paper. And even when students have done this in another class and they know it works, they're still not going to do it for themselves the next time, right? Anyway, most students aren't. So if we can all sort of work this into our assignment sequence, I think that would be really supportive to students. I have on the table placed an example of my annotated bibliography project guidelines. So you don't need to look at it now. I just want you to know it's there. It's also in the set of materials that everyone will have access to. So you don't need to study it at this moment. I'm just sharing it here because I want to note that this is a serious assignment. It's one of the major projects in the course. And this is just one way that you could approach it. One of the things that overwhelms students with this assignment, in addition to just doing the research and the writing, is the genre of the annotated bibliography, which maybe some of you are not totally familiar with, and that's fine. I have decided that I want to sort of alleviate some of that pressure that they're feeling about the writing in the right way, so to speak, for the annotated bibliography. So I have, I'm moving in the direction of having students just complete a grid, and you have an example of that on the table as well, where they're doing all the same thinking work, but they're not worried about how it all fits together and looks on the page, which I don't know if you've noticed, but students get really wound up about the formatting and stuff like that without worrying as much about the thinking part, right? So I want them to worry about the thinking here So the grid is a way to provide sort of a scaffold for that. So I would recommend that. And as you can see on the grid, just sort of repeating what I said earlier, we're looking for a summary of main points, examples of key evidence, evaluation of the author's credibility, things like that we've heard about in the first part with the CRAP method, right? All of that stuff would play into their note-taking for the annotated bibliography. If you, in your course, in your style of teaching, and what you know about your students, want something more creative, this is pretty dry looking, I admit. If you want something more creative, you can do this in a lot of different ways, right? I've done versions of this on Padlet. You could do it on a VoiceThread. There's lots of ways to, jazz it up a little bit, make it a little bit more social and visual. So I would encourage that too. Okay, the next big area is providing instruction on quoting, paraphrasing, and summarizing. It's hard. It's actually really hard to do these things well in writing and in speaking. So I think we underestimate it. I think we tell students, this is what we expect you to do, but we don't always explain it, and some of us might not know how to, right? That's not what we learned. That's not our background, right? So I understand that, but I do want to talk about some ways that you can still support students in these areas. And just keep in mind that, again, especially if it's an area that they're new to, unfamiliar with, or just haven't had a lot of practice with, these are really hard moves to make when you're writing about other source material. And they don't always know what these things mean. Like, what is the difference between paraphrasing and summarizing? They may not realize what the difference is. I teach this in first year writing. I teach it a lot. I spend a lot of time on it, and they still struggle with it. So that just kind of gives you some indication. And this, again, is something that we see at the undergrad through the grad level. And also, I meant to note earlier, sometimes we get very polished looking papers, but when we look really closely, I think we often see that still the way students are writing about the source material isn't quite where we want it to be, right? It's still a bit surface. They'll often they might have 5 sources, but they might write about one source in this paragraph and one source in this paragraph and one in the next, rather than really bringing them together and really thinking about how the different ideas connect. Okay, so one thing that I can recommend is that you show students model texts. So you're asking for them to write a certain kind of paper that includes source material. Show them an example of it. We all have different areas, backgrounds, different kinds of writing that we're used to seeing or trying to teach our students to do. We need to show what that looks like, because it varies significantly. There's lots of different ways that people, write with source material. If a model of such a thing doesn't exist, you could write one. You could also think about why the model doesn't exist. Like, what does that say? What is it that, there may still be a good reason you're asking people to do something, but it's worth stopping and thinking for a moment, like, why is this thing that I want them to do so badly not out there anywhere that I can find? Okay, and then finally, spend time noticing with your students how source material is integrated. You don't have to have a lot of preparation for this. Just looking at it with them, talking about what you see. How is the writer signaling that they're talking about another source here? How are they contextualizing the source? How do we know where to find that source if we want to read more about it? Is it clear? Is it not clear? So just asking those questions with your class and having them talk about it with you can go a long way to helping them understand what you're asking for, but also the why, and really thinking about let's think about this in terms of how meaningfully this person is communicating with their intended audience, because that really is, that's at the core of what we're trying to do, right? Okay, so I'm going to ask you to do a noticing exercise with one another. Just take a few minutes. On the table, there are copies of a few sample texts. There's one color copy per table, just 'cause, and then there's several black and white copies. So there should be enough for everyone. You're going to see 3 texts. You'll see a text that uses APA citation, a text that uses Chicago, and a text that uses MLA. I'd like for you to at least glance at all 3, but if you want to focus on 1 or 2 instead of all 3, that's fine. Take a minute to just read it and then talk at your table about what you notice. Okay, and here are the questions we can use to guide the discussion. These are the questions I just said aloud, so I'm just putting them up here to support your conversation. So we'll take about 5 minutes. I think something important to note is that, this is these are little excerpts, right? If you're going to do this in your class, I would suggest using a whole piece, right? Because then you're going to get the whole picture, right? I didn't want to reproduce 3 different texts for you today. So that's really important, because there's a lot that is missing in terms of context for each of these samples. I just wanted to give you a sense of what kind of conversation you could have among yourselves about what you see here in the way that the sources are being integrated in terms of signaling and attribution, but also in terms of the citation. So does anybody want to share something that they noticed, talked about, or just sort of a reflection on this type of conversation that you just engaged in? Sure. Yeah, that's definitely an option. Depending on the context of the piece, it might be, necessary. And in other contexts, it might be fine that they're just making the reference this way. Great.
It really struck me, and we were just looking at that last third piece very quickly before the time was up, but it was really striking to us when you got to that third piece how the outside text, it ends up being the critic Jay Anderson writing about these social possibilities of recreation, how that was used by the student in service of the student's ideas, as opposed to them kind of grabbing the outside expert, in the other 2 examples, and sort of a densely excerpted their ideas, but there was no kind of connective tissue provided by the student to kind of, besides those facts that we got from that guy, what idea are you presenting here with these resources, with these outside sources? But in this last one, it's really striking how, number one, engaging it was. We thought it was really engaging. Yeah, we liked that one most. And how those quotes and that Jay Anderson guy was being used in service of the student ideas instead of the other way around.
Other thoughts, comments?
So with the first piece, it seemed to me that the student had done an annotated bibliography and summarized this article in Women's Wear Daily and then copy and pasted it into their paper. That's what it felt like. It was a really nice summary of the article, but it kind of stood on its own.
Okay, I think there's a lot of assumptions about what these texts are from. So with the exception of the third one, which I think is a clear introduction to a longer paper. So without getting into the details of that. The first example is just that. It is a standalone paragraph that's actually something that we created to provide an example to students, which we do in a video, of how to summarize and paraphrase information. And that's all it is that paragraph. So it's true that it doesn't exist within a larger body that is, within a larger text that where the student is really making an argument or trying to explore a topic, right? So that's true, but I just want to make sure that it wasn't meant to be something else.
But it did that well. Like, that was the thing. It was a
Sure.
great summary.
Okay.
It was a great summary.
So I think, but the point I want to drive home is that we all have different ideas about what our students' text should look like, because we all come from different sets of experiences. We have different kinds of expertise. We know what they're going to see in a particular area, field, profession, etc. And we need to tell them those things. We need to talk about that with them, rather than being vague and expecting them to just know what to do as if there's one right way among all of us, because there's not. Let's talk about what we're expecting and why. Let's make it clear why we think that this text is so well done, right? Versus this text, which doesn't seem to be as effective in this way and this way. Because that's like you're bringing a disciplinary lens or a professional lens to what you're expecting, and we just want to make that clear to students. And so many students go from course to course thinking that there's a right answer that applies to everything, and it's really dizzying because they don't ever really figure it out, because there isn't, they never find that right answer because there isn't one. So we just want to be really clear with them and offer them a chance to talk with us about why something seems to work really well, given the expectations, the conventions, the shared values around a particular type of writing in a particular field. Okay, I hope I've sold you on the noticing exercise. So I hope you'll design one. In the event that you don't have time or don't feel confident teaching students things like how to quote, how to paraphrase, how to summarize, the Writing and Speaking Studio has a series of instructional videos, and because you have access to this folder for today's workshop, you also have access to the link to our site. I'll just take you there quickly. Right, so you could assign your students these videos where we walk people through what do these tools mean, how do we define them, how can we think about them in a way that demystifies these things. How can we show you examples and what thinking goes into something, or to making decisions about what to quote, what to paraphrase, how to do that, right? So these videos are short, but hopefully very instructive for your students, and I would encourage you to assign these things, or take a look at them yourselves and see if you might want to share them in class. I don't think we have time for me to play it, so I will end there, and we would love to just have some conversation with everyone. So maybe you have some questions for one of us, or just something that you have been thinking about in the course of this conversation that you want to share with the rest of the group.
Should encourage them to go straight to these specific databases rather than OneSearch, or if that is a reasonable tool for them to use?
Good question, because I struggle with this myself and how to teach this to students, how to do the research process, and I think it depends. I think OneSearch can be a great tool for a lot of beginner assignments. For those of you who aren't aware, OneSearch is our library catalog, but it also incorporates a lot of the databases in them. So students can effectively do an article search or journal search in OneSearch, and they're doing multiple databases at once. So for something a little bit beginner, where they might need a little hand-holding, I think it can be great. Again, they have the problem of getting overwhelmed by irrelevant sources. So just as long as they're using the filters on the left side, that will filter out by date, subject. I'm trying to think what else. Yeah, as long as they're using the filters on the side and getting a very good quality search, I think OneSearch can be okay and an effective tool. I will say that one of the problems with OneSearch is that not all of our databases are in there, and some of them are very popular ones that the students use. So for example, I believe JSTOR is not in there, which is a big one, so they're missing out on a big pile of research. Some of the ones like WGSN are not in there, things that are more visual, Mintel, a lot of the business marketing reporting databases are not in there. Their data just doesn't play well with the OneSearch API. So for technical reasons, sometimes you can't use OneSearch if you are using a source that's not in there. So check with us if you're not sure. And the other thing I'll say is that the argument for using OneSearch versus using the individual database from the list, this is what I tell students. It can be the difference between looking through your whole house for something, like maybe you're trying to find one sock. If you're searching your whole house, it's going to take a while to find it. And that's kind of how I think of as OneSearch. It's like a big house of research. But a database can be like a single drawer in a dresser. So you'll find it faster because it's in a smaller collection. So again, it's just about what kind of research it is. If it's very specialized, then yeah, it's a good idea to just use one database. If it's a beginner assignment, maybe it's okay to use OneSearch. That's my thought.
Two things. One is we're going to make the presentation available to you, as well as all of the handouts and materials. So CET is going to send that to you. And the other, I had a question for the two of you. Are both of you available to come into classrooms to run workshops for students? And so that's also a really great resource if you haven't taken advantage of that. Yes, Brian.
I have a chat GPT related question. So what I'd like to hear from you is, I think you're presenting us with these really wonderful methods for engaging students in these meaningful ways. How do you think these methods can help us create learning situations that steer students away from wanting to lean into things like artificial intelligence assisted kind of content generation?
Or just old-fashioned plagiarism.
Yeah, I mean, but I think now, like,
Now it's easier.
right, yeah.
Well, I think the more instruction we can provide, the more support we can provide, and the more we can demystify what we're asking them to do, the less likely they're going to be to try and take shortcuts, whether that's old-fashioned cheating or using something like ChatGPT. Definitely the type of assignment or the type of thing we ask them to write or present on is going to impact whether they can use something like that. But also supportive assignments require them to submit evidence of various parts of the process, and that does make it pretty hard for them to use other means to produce the work, right? Conversation in class connected with the assignment, multiple stages of the assignment, all of these things help us ensure that students feel supported. That's really number one. That they're excited to do the work and learn from it, and that they understand why they're doing it and feel like they're getting something and getting somewhere and learning. But then, it does provide us evidence, right? So I think all those combined are really important.
The other thing that I do a lot with my students is they do journals. And I ask them to reflect on their learning, because learning is really experience plus reflection, right? That leads to deep learning. So there are things you can do, specific prompts for reflections, like which source did you find the most informative and why, right? And so if they're using ChatGPT, they can't answer that question. And so there you can like dig into the process. Like Sarah was saying, I fully support breaking the process down into pieces and then asking them to reflect on various aspects of the process, and they won't be able to answer that if they haven't actually done it. So I think that's another good way to do it.
I don't have much to add, but I was just thinking of an experience I had where I was teaching period costume resources for an assignment where students had to like recreate a work of literature as if they were doing the costuming, and they had to pick a specific period. So I was like, we've got all these databases, we've got Victorian, we've got like, French colonial. And then the teacher invited me to the final presentation day, and I was really surprised that a lot of the students hadn't used some of the databases. What they had actually turned to was like inspiration from their family histories. So one suggestion I have is to try to personalize the student's experience, or have the students go out and do something or create something and have that be part of the assignment, because that's something that you can't replicate, is the student's personal experience. And I also think that's something that's meaningful to the student, that helps them engage in the assignment.
So I just put up here our email addresses, so if you want to be in touch with us, if you have more questions, if things come up later, you want to talk more about what we talked about today, please be in touch. Thank you so much for coming. This was really fabulous. It was great working with you today.